Howdy! Today we're going to talk about chapters 8 and 9, the instructional strategy. Here's where we are in the Dick and Carey model. You can see we've really come a long way, and we're almost to the point where we're going to start developing our PowerPoint unit. So that'll be fun. So we've done a lot of analysis, and we started the development phase when we developed our assessments last week. So the next part is to develop your strategy. So chapters 8 and 9 are all about the ways that an instructional designer identifies how the instruction will engage the learner. Okay, so it's the how of the process. In previous steps, we identified what we need to teach through the objectives. These are the things we need to teach. The instructional strategy is going to identify how are we going to teach these things. So this leads up to actually developing your material. So this is the plan for developing your actual PowerPoint unit. Okay, so what is an instructional strategy? Okay, an instructional strategy describes the general components of a set of instructional materials and the procedures used with those materials to allow the student to master the learning outcomes. Okay, so kind of two parts to this. First, it's the components of the set of materials, and then the procedures that allow the student to learn what you're trying to teach them. The concept of instructional strategy originated with the events of instruction, as described by Gagne in his 9 events of instruction. So what we're going to do is based on Gagne's model of the 9 events of instruction. And we'll go over each one of these, but this kind of gives you an overview of what the 9 items are. So the 9 events of instruction are organized into 5 major learning components, and this becomes your instructional strategy. Okay, so we have pre-instructional activities. These are things we do before we actually start presenting the actual content. Then we present the content. We allow the learner to participate in our content because the idea of the whole model is that the learner be an active participant. So we're going to allow the learner to participate. Then we have to have some kind of assessment that we talked about last week that allows us to know whether the learner has actually learned the objectives. And then we have some follow-through activities. So let's talk briefly about each of these areas. So the pre-instructional area starts with motivating the learners. Okay, and previously we had talked about Keller's ARCS model of motivational design and how that plays into motivation. So there are 4 things: attention, relevance, confidence, satisfaction. So attention. We have to capture the interest of the learners. We want to make them curious to learn. So how we do this is we come up with some kind of strategy of something we're going to do to get the learner excited to take the learning. So this could be like a video that we show. It could be a funny video that kind of gets their attention. It could be a more serious video that shows them what they're going to learn is important. We could tell a personal story. For instance, if I'm talking about interviewing, maybe I had not prepared for an interview. Maybe I went on an interview once and I didn't do the things we're trying to get our students to do through training. And so let's say the training's about interview skills. So I may tell a story about here's something that happened to me personally, and because I wasn't prepared, I didn't do well, I didn't get the job, but I'm going to teach you how to do better. So it could be a personal story like that. Okay. Then it has to have relevance. We need to let the student know how, this applies to their life. You know what? And this is important for any kind of learning. What can I do with this later? How's this apply to my life? How's this apply to my career? Why is it valuable? Okay, we have to give it relevance. And we have to instill confidence in learners. They need to think that, yeah, I'm going to take this, I'm going to do great, I'm going to succeed. So through our training, we need to have like sort of a positive kind of thing where we're making the learner go, oh yeah, I can do this. And then satisfaction. We need to let the learner feel like, they're getting something out of this. I feel good about this experience and I want to continue learning, or I'm excited now and I want to go off and do what I learned. Okay, so in your strategy, you'll be coming up with something to grab their attention. And think about the ARCS model when you do that. Okay, then we have to inform the learner of the objectives. Okay, and what this does, it just kind of tells the learner, here are the objectives I'm going to teach you for this section of the training. And this allows the learner to focus, allows the learner to go, okay, this is what I'm going to be learning. And then they focus on those objectives. So by informing them, and in the strategy, you're going to tell us how are you going to do that. We'll go over that in a minute. Then we want to stimulate recall of prerequisite skills. Okay, we have to be able to show the relationship between new content and what they already know. Okay, we want to promote their learning by having them kind of remember, oh yeah, well I know this and this and this and that. I'm going to expand on that in this learning. So we're kind of making them recall what they already know. Because everybody comes to any kind of training with some kind of knowledge or skill, about the topic. Okay, then we have content presentation. So in content presentation, this is kind of the meat of the training. This is where we're going to actually do the teaching. So we have to determine what information is it that we need to present to meet the objective. Okay, so we want to think about information and concepts and rules. What do we have to present to the learner? And one good way to do that is through the use of examples and non-examples. Okay, so people learn very well by example. So if I am talking about going to an interview and how to dress, for instance, I'm going to want to use examples. Here's a good example of what you should look like. And a non-example would be the opposite. Here's what you shouldn't look like. Okay, so those allow a learner to really relate to that when you give examples. Okay, then we have learner participation. Okay, so learner participation is important because it allows the learner to see if they have learned the material well enough to go on, or do they need to go back and sort of look at things. Okay, so this is enhancing the learning process with activities that are directly relevant to the objectives and gives learners the opportunity to practice what you want them to be able to do. In other words, they're trying out the learning. Not only do learners practice, but we give them feedback. So by giving them feedback, it allows them to determine where they are in the process, if they need to go back and review something or if they've mastered the material. And we just don't want to tell them if they're right or wrong. We need to provide feedback that, yes, you're right, this is a good way to do this because, and explain it, or no, this really isn't the right answer because. So we want to do that in order to provide them with that detail, and also provides reinforcement. Then we do assessment. Assessment, and we talked about that last week in detail. So we need to do assessment, things like, the practice test, the post-test, entry skills, all those things we learned about, because we want to see what they've accomplished, okay? So we have to have a strategy for assessment. Are you going to do the assessment after each presentation of content? Are you going to do the assessment at the end of all the content? Okay, so these are things you'll decide in your strategy. Okay. Then we have follow-through activities. Okay, so this is the final component in Gagne's strategy. So a couple things we're concerned with here. We're concerned with memory skills and strategies. And these are things that we would give the learner to help them when they're back in the performance context, back on their job. So this isn't something that we do during training or give them during training. It's sort of information given to help them once they're at their job. Because any kind of training you take, I mean, you're going to have resources when you go back to work. So what kind of resources will we give the learner? And here's an example of a job aid. Let's say I'm teaching recruiters how to go about the recruiting process. And so I've created this little job aid listing all the steps that they can sort of have at their desk and then go through these steps as they're going through the recruiting process. That would be a job aid. It could be a series of videos that I provide for the learner, or could be procedure manuals. But whatever I give to the learner to allow them to carry out the skills I've taught them. Okay, then we have transfer of learning issues, and I know we've talked a lot about transfer of learning because the last thing we want to do is train somebody and then not have them not use the learning in the performance context. So by transferring the learning to the performance context, we're meeting the objectives of the training. So what strategies can you use to assure that what I'm teaching them will be transferred? And this, you got to kind of think a little creatively and think, what kind of things can I do to make sure that they actually do transfer the learning? So that's the end of chapters 8 and 9. So watch the video about how to actually do your strategy. Thank you.